Her twin babies need heart surgery, but the only surgeon is the millionaire CEO who left them. She stood in the doorway of his pristine office, her twins gasping in her trembling arms, and whispered the words that would shatter his carefully constructed world. "They're dying, Adrian. And you're the only one who can save them." But that moment was still 4 hours away. 4 hours that would change everything. Thanks so much for being here, my amazing story family. If you're excited for today's adventure and ready to dive in, make sure to hit subscribe and share in the comments where you're tuning in from. And don't forget, another captivating story awaits you tomorrow. You definitely won't want to miss it. The coffee maker sputtered its last breath just as 18-month-old Lucas began his morning cry, the weak, breathless sound that had replaced his once lusty wails. Elena Martinez stared at the broken machine with the exhausted resignation of someone who'd learned that everything eventually breaks when you can't afford to replace it. "Shoo, baby boy," she whispered, lifting Lucas from his crib. His tiny chest rose and fell rapidly, each breath a visible effort that made her heart clench. Across the cramped bedroom, Lily stirred in her matching crib, her lips bearing the telltale blue tinge that had become Elena's constant nightmare. The apartment was a study in making do, second-hand furniture arranged with care, toys from thrift stores cleaned until they gleamed, and everywhere the evidence of a mother's fierce love battling impossible circumstances. Bills lay stacked on the kitchen counter, some marked "Final Notice" in aggressive red letters. Elena had stopped opening them 3 days ago. She heated bottles with water from the kettle, a trick she'd learned when the microwave died last month, and tried not to calculate how many meals she'd skipped to afford the special formula Dr. Chun had prescribed. Lucas took his bottle slowly, pausing frequently to catch his breath, while Lily fussed weakly in her high chair. "Eat, sweetheart," Elena coaxed, but Lily barely managed 2 ounces before pushing the bottle away with tiny hands that trembled from exhaustion. At 18 months, both twins were smaller than 12-month-olds, their growth stunted by hearts that couldn't keep up with their bodies' demands. Elena's phone buzzed, a text from her manager at Page and Prose bookstore. "Haven't seen you in 3 days. If you need more time off, I understand, but I can't hold your position much longer." She closed her eyes. The job paid barely above minimum wage, but it was flexible and understanding about her children's medical needs. If she lost it... The thought was interrupted by a sound that made her blood freeze. Lily's breathing had become a harsh whistle, her tiny face turning dusky blue around the edges. Elena scooped her daughter up, holding her upright and rubbing her back in the motion that sometimes helped. "Come on, baby girl. Breathe for mama." After what felt like eternity but was probably 30 seconds, Lily's color improved slightly. Elena sank into the second-hand rocking chair, both twins in her arms, and allowed herself exactly 1 minute of tears. Then she dried her eyes and reached for her phone. "Dr. Chen's office? This is Elena Martinez. I need to move up Lily and Lucas's appointment. Something's changed." 42 floors above the Seattle streets, Dr. Adrian Cross stood in his penthouse office windows, watching the city wake up below. His reflection stared back, tall, sharp-suited, successful by every measure that mattered. At 34, he was the youngest department head in Seattle Children's Hospital history, with surgical techniques that had revolutionized pediatric cardiac care. His office was a monument to achievement, awards covering one wall, medical journals featuring his research scattered across a desk that cost more than most people's cars, and everywhere the gleaming sterility of a man who kept the world at arm's length. The coffee in his hand was perfect, Ethiopian single origin, prepared by his assistant exactly the way he liked it. Everything in Adrian's life was perfect, controlled, predictable. Exactly how he needed it to be. His phone showed 17 missed calls from his father. Adrian deleted them without listening to the voicemails. Some patterns, once broken, stayed broken. "Dr. Cross." Jennifer's voice came through the intercom. "Your 8 a.m. consultation is here early. The Morrison case, the infant with arterial switch complications. Send them in 5 minutes." Adrian straightened his tie and reviewed the file one more time. Baby Morrison would make a full recovery with the surgery he'd perform next week. Another life saved, another victory in his undefeated record. It wasn't enough anymore. The thought came unbidden, as it had increasingly often lately. He saved children's lives, published groundbreaking research, built surgical programs that would outlast him. So why did he feel empty? Why did success taste like ash? His computer chimed with an email marked urgent from a hospital's chief administrator. Board meeting moved to 3 p.m. today. Discuss budget cuts to charitable care program. Adrian's jaw tightened. The charitable care program treated children whose families couldn't afford their astronomical medical bills. He'd fought to establish it, personally funded much of it, and now bureaucrats wanted to gut it for profit margins. Children like. The thought stopped abruptly. Adrian had trained himself not to think about children who might need help they couldn't afford. It was a dangerous road that led to memories he kept buried deep. Instead, he focused on his schedule: 2 surgeries, 3 consultations, a medical journal interview, dinner with the hospital's major donors. A life of purpose and achievement that left no room for the dreams that had been haunting him lately. Dreams of dark-haired children with eyes like his own, reaching for him with tiny hands he could never quite touch. Dr. Cross. Jennifer's voice interrupted his thoughts. There's been a change to your afternoon schedule. A Dr. Chun from pediatric cardiology wants to discuss an urgent consultation. Something about twins with complex cardiac defects. Adrian's chest tightened inexplicably. Did she specify the nature of the defects? Hypoplastic left heart syndrome, bilateral presentation. She says it's unprecedented. The words hit Adrian like a physical blow, though he couldn't understand why. HLHS was rare enough in single births, but bilateral twins? He'd never seen a case like that in his 15 years of practice. Something about it felt important, urgent in a way that had nothing to do with medicine. Move my 2 p.m. consultation. I'll see Dr. Chun at 1:30. Actually, sir, she's requesting to bring the patient's mother directly to you. Emergency consultation. She says you're the only surgeon in the country who specializes in this specific presentation in infants this young. Adrian paused, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. Something cold moved through his chest, not fear exactly, but a premonition that his carefully ordered world was about to shift on its axis. What's the mother's name? Elena Martinez. The coffee cup slipped from Adrian's fingers, shattering against the marble floor in an explosion of porcelain and perfect Ethiopian blend. Elena. The name hit him like a lightning strike, bringing with it a flood of memories he'd spent 2 years suppressing. Dark hair spilling across white pillows. Laughter that lit up her entire face. The way she'd looked at him like he was everything good in the world, before he'd proven her wrong. Sir? Dr. Cross, are you all right? Adrian stared at the spreading stain on his office floor, his heart hammering against his ribs. Elena Martinez. After 2 years of silence, she was coming here. With twins. Twins with the same rare heart defect that... No, he whispered, the pieces clicking together with horrifying clarity. No, no, no. Sir. Cancel it. The words came out sharper than he intended. Tell Dr. Chun that Dr. Williams in Portland can handle the case. I'm not available. But sir, she specifically said. I said cancel it, Jennifer. Adrian turned away from the window, his reflection now showing a man whose careful control was fracturing. Elena Martinez. Twins. 18 months old, if his calculations were correct. 18 months since that night when he'd walked away from the only woman who'd ever made him believe he could be something other than the damaged, destructive force his father had always said he was. He'd left to protect her. He'd convinced himself it was noble, necessary. But if those children were his, if Elena had been pregnant when he walked away, the thought was too enormous, too devastating to complete. Adrian sank into his chair, his perfect life suddenly feeling like a house of cards in a hurricane. His intercom buzzed again. "Dr. Cross? Ms. Martinez is here. She's insisting on seeing you personally. She says it's about twins named Lily and Lucas." Adrian's world stopped. Lily and Lucas. He dreamed those names. In the nightmares that woke him at 3 a.m., children with those exact names reached for him with tiny hands and eyes that looked just like. "Send her in," he heard himself say. "Sir." "Send her in now." Adrian stood on unsteady legs, smoothing his tie with hands that trembled despite his best efforts. In 60 seconds, Elena Martinez would walk through that door carrying children who might be his. Children who were dying. Children he'd never known existed because he'd been too much of a coward to stay and fight for the woman he loved. What do you think Adrian is feeling right now? Terror, guilt, or something else entirely? And how do you think Elena will handle seeing him again after 2 years of silence? Drop your thoughts below. I can't wait to see your predictions. He heard footsteps in the hallway. Soft voices. The sound of babies making those weak, breathless cries that his trained ear recognized as cardiac distress. Adrian straightened his shoulders and prepared to face the consequences of the biggest mistake of his life. The door opened. The door opened, and Elena Martinez stepped into Adrian's pristine office like a ghost from a life he'd tried to forget. She looked exactly the same and completely different. Her dark hair still fell in waves around her shoulders. Her brown eyes still held that intelligence that had first captivated him, but there were new lines of exhaustion around those eyes, a thinness to her frame that spoke of sacrifices he couldn't begin to imagine. In her arms, she carried 2 babies. Adrian's breath caught in his chest as his gaze moved to the children. The boy was small for his age, with Adrian's own dark hair and pale skin. The girl had Elena's coloring but unmistakably familiar green eyes. Eyes that looked back at him with innocent curiosity from a face that was a perfect feminine version of his own childhood photos. "Hello, Adrian," Elena said quietly, her voice steady despite the way her hands trembled as she held the children. "These are your children, Lily and Lucas. And they're dying." The words hit Adrian like physical blows. He gripped the edge of his desk, his knees threatening to buckle as 20 months of suppressed guilt and longing crashed over him in a devastating wave. These weren't just Elena's babies, they were his. His children. The family he'd walked away from before he'd even known it existed. "Elena, his voice cracked, and he cleared his throat, struggling for the professional composure that had carried him through countless crisis situations. But this wasn't a medical emergency he could compartmentalize. This was his life, exploding in front of him in real time. "Don't." Elena's voice cut through his stammering with sharp precision. "Don't you dare try to explain or rationalize or do whatever it is you're about to do. Just look at them, Adrian. Really look at them." Adrian forced himself to meet her gaze, then let his eyes move to the children she held. The medical part of his brain immediately cataloged the signs he'd been trained to recognize. The slight blue tinge to their lips, the rapid, shallow breathing, the way they seemed smaller and more fragile than healthy 18-month-olds should be. But beneath the clinical assessment, something deeper was breaking apart inside his chest. The boy, Lucas, had his hands curled into tiny fists, and Adrian could see the faint tremor of exhaustion in those small fingers. The girl, Lily, was looking directly at him with those impossible green eyes, and when she smiled, a weak but genuine smile, Adrian felt something inside him shatter completely. "They have hypoplastic left heart syndrome," Elena continued, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "Bilateral presentation with complications that Dr. Chun says she's never seen before. They need surgery, Adrian. Complex surgery that only 3 people in the country can perform." Adrian nodded slowly, his medical training finally kicking in enough to let him speak. "The other 2 surgeons?" "Dr. Reyes is in Guatemala for the next 6 weeks. Dr. Patterson is in Bangladesh until next month." Elena's voice remained steady, but Adrian could see the desperation she was fighting to contain. "You're the only one who can save them. Elena." Adrian took a step toward her, then stopped when he saw her entire body tense. "Why didn't you tell me? When you found out you were pregnant, why didn't you tell you?" Elena's composure finally cracked, and Adrian saw a flash of the fury she'd been holding back. "Tell the man who looked me in the eye and said I was nothing more than a temporary distraction? Tell the man who walked out of my apartment like I was something dirty he needed to wash off?" The accusation hit Adrian like a slap. He remembered that night, remembered the cruel words he'd used to drive her away, the lies he'd told himself were necessary to protect her from the darkness he carried. But seeing the pain in her eyes now, holding children who were living proof of what he'd destroyed, those justifications crumbled to ash. "That's not what I meant," he said quietly. "That's not who you were to me." "Then what was I, Adrian?" Elena shifted both babies to one arm and used her free hand to wipe away tears she clearly hadn't meant to shed. "Because from where I stood, watching you walk away without a backward glance, it seemed pretty clear what I meant to you." Adrian opened his mouth to respond, but Lucas chose that moment to let out a weak cry that made both adults freeze. The sound was wrong, too breathy, too tired, the cry of a child whose heart couldn't keep up with his body's demands. "May I?" Adrian gestured toward the babies, his professional instincts overriding the emotional chaos in his chest. Elena hesitated for a long moment, then nodded. "Lucas first. He's been having more breathing episodes." Adrian's hands shook as he reached for his son, for the first time. The baby was so light, so fragile, and when those tiny fingers curled instinctively around Adrian's thumb, he had to bite back a sound that was part sob, part prayer. Lucas looked up at him with serious eyes that were exactly Elena's warm brown, and Adrian felt his heart break and rebuild itself in the space of a single heartbeat. This was his child. His son. A little boy who'd lived 18 months without knowing his father because Adrian had been too much of a coward to stay and fight for what mattered. "Hello, Lucas," Adrian whispered, his voice rough with emotion. I'm your daddy." The words felt foreign and right at the same time, and when Lucas made a soft sound and reached toward Adrian's face with one tiny hand, Adrian had to close his eyes to maintain any semblance of control. He examined Lucas with gentle, practiced hands, feeling for the telltale signs of heart failure while trying to ignore the way the baby seemed to calm at his touch. The medical assessment was grim. Lucas was in early stages of congestive heart failure, his small body struggling to circulate blood efficiently. Without surgery, he had weeks at most. "Now Lily," Elena said softly, and Adrian realized she'd been watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. When Adrian took his daughter in his arms, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Lily was smaller than Lucas, more delicate, but her grip was stronger when she wrapped her tiny fingers around his. Those green eyes, his eyes, studied his face with an intensity that was almost unsettling. "She knows you," Elena said quietly. "I don't know how, but she does. She's been fussier than usual the last few days, like she could sense we were coming here." Adrian felt his throat close as he examined Lily. Her condition was even more critical than Lucas's. Her lips were more deeply cyanotic, her breathing more labored. She needed surgery immediately, possibly within days. "How long have they been symptomatic?" he asked, shifting back into professional mode because it was the only way he could function. "Months," Elena admitted. "I knew something was wrong when they were 6 months old, but the doctors kept saying it was normal variation, that I was being an overprotective first-time mother. By the time we got the right diagnosis..." She trailed off, shaking her head. Adrian felt a surge of fury at the medical professionals who dismissed Elena's concerns, followed immediately by a crushing wave of guilt. If he'd been there, if he'd stayed, he would have recognized the signs immediately. His children had suffered because of his cowardice. "I can do the surgery," he said quietly, still holding Lily close to his chest. Both of them, back-to-back procedures. The success rate for bilateral HLHS is lower than single cases, but with the techniques I've developed. He looked up to meet Elena's eyes. "I can save them." Relief flooded Elena's face, followed quickly by something that looked like suspicion. Just like that? You'll do it. Just like that. Adrian handed Lily back to Elena with reluctance. They're my children too, Elena. Whatever happened between us, whatever mistakes I made, they're innocent in all of this. Elena studied his face for a long moment, and Adrian had the unsettling feeling she could see straight through to his soul. What changed? She asked finally. 2 hours ago, your assistant was trying to refer us to Portland. Now suddenly you're willing to help. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, the gesture achingly familiar to Elena from their shared past. I didn't know, he said simply. I didn't know they were mine. If I had. If you had, what? You would have stayed. Elena's voice carried a bitter edge. You would have played house with me and pretended to be happy until the responsibility became too much and you disappeared again. I don't know, Adrian admitted, the honesty surprising them both. I was terrified, Elena. Terrified of turning into my father, of destroying everything I touched the way he did. I thought leaving was protecting you. Well, congratulations, Elena said, shifting both babies as they began to fuss. You protected me right into 18 months of doing this alone. 18 months of welfare applications and food banks, and staying up all night wondering if my children were going to die because I couldn't afford the medical care they needed. Each word was a knife to Adrian's chest, but he forced himself to listen, to really hear what his choices had cost. Elena, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry doesn't help them breathe easier, Elena cut him off. Sorry doesn't pay for their medications, or keep the lights on, or feed them when they're too weak to eat. Sorry is just another word, Adrian. What do you think Elena should demand from Adrian beyond just the surgery? Should she make him prove his commitment, or focus only on saving the twins? Share your thoughts below. They stood in tense silence for a moment, the weight of 2 years of pain and misunderstanding filling the space between them. Finally, Adrian spoke. What do you need from me? Beyond the surgery, I mean. What can I do to help? Elena looked at him with surprise, as if she hadn't expected the question. I need you to save them, she said simply. That's all. Save them, and then we'll figure out what comes next. Adrian nodded, understanding that this was all the trust she could offer right now. It would have to be enough. I'll need to admit them immediately for pre-surgical monitoring. The procedures will need to be done within the next 48 hours. I can't afford. You won't pay for any of it, Adrian interrupted. Not the surgery, not the hospital stay, not the medications. Nothing. Elena's eyes narrowed. I don't want your charity. It's not charity. They're my children. Adrian met her gaze steadily. I may have failed them for the first 18 months of their lives, but I won't fail them now. For the first time since she'd walked into his office, Elena's rigid control seemed to waver. She looked down at the babies in her arms, then back at Adrian, and he could see her weighing her pride against her children's needs. Okay, she said finally. But this doesn't change anything between us. This is about them, not us. Understood. Adrian picked up his phone and dialed his assistant. Jennifer, I need you to clear my schedule for the rest of the week. And get me Dr. Patterson's surgical team. We're going to need them. Also, arrange for immediate admission to the pediatric cardiac unit for twins Martinez, priority 1 status. As he spoke, Adrian watched Elena sway slightly on her feet, exhaustion finally catching up with her now that the immediate crisis was being addressed. When had she last eaten? Last slept? When had she last had anyone to share this impossible burden? Elena, he said after hanging up the phone. When's the last time you ate? She looked at him like the question was foreign. This morning. I think. You think. I've been focused on them, not me. She gestured to the babies. That's what mothers do. Adrian felt another stab of guilt, imagining Elena skipping meals to afford formula, staying awake nights monitoring their breathing, carrying this terror alone for months. "Well, you're not alone anymore," he said quietly. "Whatever happens between us, you're not alone in this." Elena's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. "Don't make promises you can't keep, Adrian. I can't survive you leaving again." The raw honesty in her voice hit Adrian like a physical blow. Looking at Elena, exhausted, proud, fierce in her love for their children, he realized that walking away 2 years ago hadn't protected anyone. It had only caused more pain, more damage, more loss. "I'm not leaving," he said, the words carrying the weight of a vow. "Not this time. Not ever again." Elena searched his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "We'll see," she said, but there was something in her voice that hadn't been there before, the smallest seed of hope. "Dr. Cross." Jennifer's voice came through the intercom. "The pediatric cardiac unit is ready for the twins. Transport is on their way up." Adrian looked at Elena, at his children, at the family he'd walked away from and somehow been given a second chance to save. The next 48 hours would determine whether Lily and Lucas lived or died. But beyond that, they would determine whether he could prove to Elena, and to himself, that he was capable of being the man they deserved. "Ready?" he asked Elena. She adjusted her grip on the babies and straightened her shoulders with a strength that took Adrian's breath away. "I've been ready for 18 months. Together, they walked toward the door and whatever came next. The pediatric cardiac intensive care unit was a symphony of beeping monitors, hushed voices, and the quiet desperation that clung to every corner where children fought for their lives. Adrian had walked these halls thousands of times, but never as a father watching his own children being connected to machines that would monitor their failing hearts. Elena sat in the uncomfortable chair beside the twins' shared room, her eyes tracking every number on every screen with the obsessive focus of a mother who'd learned to read medical equipment like scripture. Lucas was in the bed closest to the window, while Lily occupied the one near the door, close enough that Elena could touch both of them at the same time. Adrian stood at the foot of Lucas's bed, reviewing the echocardiogram results on his tablet with hands that remained steady through sheer force of will. The images showed exactly what he'd expected, and feared. Both children had severe hypoplastic left heart syndrome, but the bilateral presentation created complications he'd never encountered before. "Talk to me in plain English," Elena said without looking away from the monitors. "Not doctor speak. Real words." Adrian set down the tablet and moved closer to her chair. Their left ventricles, the main pumping chambers of their hearts, never developed properly. In a normal case, we'd reconstruct the circulation to let the right ventricle do all the work. But because both twins have the same defect, their hearts have been compensating in unusual ways. "What does that mean for the surgery?" "It means I'll need to essentially rebuild their entire cardiac circulation systems." Adrian sat down in the chair across from Elena, close enough that he could see the exhaustion written in the lines around her eyes. "The procedure is called the Norwood operation, but I'll need to modify it significantly for their specific anatomy." Elena finally looked at him directly. "What are their chances?" Adrian met her gaze steadily, knowing she deserved the truth. "In normal cases, the Norwood has about an 85% success rate. But bilateral HLHS in twins, there's no real precedent. I'd estimate 70% for one successful surgery, maybe 60% for both. Those aren't good odds." "No," Adrian admitted. "They're not. But without surgery, they won't live another month." Elena nodded slowly, then reached out to stroke Lucas's tiny hand. "When?" "Tomorrow morning for Lucas, if his numbers stabilize overnight. Lily will follow 24 hours later, assuming Lucas's surgery goes well." Adrian watched Elena's face carefully. "Elena, there's something else we need to discuss." She tensed. "What?" "The hospital administration." Adrian chose his words carefully. "They're concerned about my emotional objectivity, operating on my own children." Elena's head snapped up, her eyes flashing with anger. Are you saying they won't let you do the surgery? They're suggesting I recuse myself. Let Dr. Williams from Portland handle it, or wait for Dr. Reyes to return from Guatemala. Lucas and Lily don't have 6 weeks. Elena's voice was dangerously quiet. And Dr. Williams doesn't have your experience with complex modifications. I know that. You know that. But the hospital's ethics board sees a potential conflict of interest. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, frustration bleeding through his professional composure. They're worried that my emotional involvement could compromise my judgment during surgery. Elena stared at him for a long moment, and Adrian could see her weighing his words against her memories of his past abandonment. "And what do you think?" she asked finally. "Do you think your emotions will compromise your judgment?" Adrian looked at his children, Lucas sleeping fitfully despite the medications, Lily watching the ceiling with those 2 serious green eyes, and felt his chest tighten with a love so fierce it was almost painful. The thought of another surgeon's hands inside their tiny chests, another person holding their lives in the balance, made him physically ill. "I think," he said carefully, "that no one will fight harder to save them than I will." "That's not what I asked." Adrian met Elena's gaze directly. "My emotions make me more determined, not less careful. I've never had more reason to be perfect." Elena studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. "Then fight for the right to save them. Because if you walk away from this surgery, if you let someone else operate on our children because it's easier or safer for your career, I will never forgive you. And more importantly, you'll never forgive yourself." The conviction in her voice hit Adrian like a physical force. This was Elena at her core, fierce, uncompromising, willing to fight for what mattered even when the odds were impossible. It was one of the things that had made him fall in love with her, and one of the reasons he'd been terrified of destroying her. "I won't walk away," he said quietly. "Not from them. Not from you. Not again." Before Elena could respond, the door opened and Dr. Patricia Wong, the hospital's chief of staff, entered with 2 other administrators Adrian recognized but didn't particularly like. Elena immediately tensed, her protective instincts flaring at the intrusion of strangers into her children's space. "Dr. Cross," Dr. Wong said with professional courtesy. "Could we speak privately?" "Anything you need to say can be said in front of Elena," Adrian replied, standing to face the group. "She's their mother." Dr. Wong glanced at Elena, then back at Adrian. "Very well. The ethics board has reviewed the situation, and we have significant concerns about your emotional objectivity. We're recommending that Dr. Williams take over the case." "No." The word came from Elena, sharp and absolute. All 3 administrators turned to look at her in surprise. "Dr. Williams has never performed a bilateral Norwood. Dr. Cross is the only surgeon in the country with the specific expertise my children need." "Ms. Martinez," one of the other administrators began, "we understand your concerns, but Dr. Cross's personal involvement in this case is exactly why he's the right choice," Elena interrupted, standing to face them with a strength that made Adrian's chest swell with pride. "You want to talk about objectivity? I'm their mother. I've spent 18 months watching them struggle to breathe, holding them through crisis after crisis, learning every sound their hearts make when they're failing. If anyone lacks objectivity here, it's me. But I know who I trust to save them." Dr. Wong shifted uncomfortably. "Ms. Martinez, the hospital has protocols." "The hospital has protocols that are designed to protect the institution, not my children," Elena said, her voice rising slightly. "Dr. Cross has saved hundreds of children with complex cardiac defects. His success rate is unmatched. Are you really going to deny my children the best possible care because of paperwork?" Adrian watched Elena defend him, defend their family, with an emotion he couldn't quite name. 2 years ago, he'd convinced himself he was protecting her by leaving. Now he could see that Elena didn't need protection. She needed partnership. She needed someone strong enough to stand beside her, not someone who ran at the first sign of difficulty. The decision isn't final, Dr. Wong said carefully. But we need assurances that Dr. Cross can maintain appropriate professional distance during the procedures. You have my word, Adrian said quietly. And my track record. I've never lost a patient due to emotional compromise, and I won't start with my own children. Do you think Adrian can convince the hospital board to let him operate? Or should Elena take even stronger action to fight for her children? Let me know your thoughts below. Dr. Wong looked between Adrian and Elena, clearly uncomfortable with the situation but recognizing the strength of their arguments. We'll reconvene the ethics board tomorrow morning. The surgery is postponed until we reach a decision. No. Elena's voice was ice cold. My son doesn't have time for your committees and politics. If this hospital won't provide the care my children need, I'll find one that will. Adrian felt his heart stop. If Elena took the twins to another hospital, they might not survive the transport. And even if they did, no other surgeon had his specific experience with the techniques these babies would need. Elena, he said quietly, moving them now could be dangerous. And waiting for bureaucrats to decide my children's fate could be fatal. Elena's eyes blazed as she looked at the administrators. You have until 8 a.m. tomorrow to approve Dr. Cross for this surgery. After that, we're gone. Dr. Wong's professional composure finally cracked slightly. Ms. Martinez, you're not in a position to make demands. I'm their mother, Elena said with quiet ferocity. That's the only position that matters. The administrators exchanged glances, clearly recognizing that Elena meant every word. After a tense moment, Dr. Wong nodded. We'll have a decision by 7 a.m. After they left, Elena sank back into her chair, the adrenaline of confrontation leaving her visibly drained. Adrian sat down beside her, close enough to offer comfort but not so close as to invade her space. That was. He began. Necessary, Elena finished. I won't let them use our children as pawns in their bureaucratic games. Adrian looked at Elena, exhausted but unbowed, fierce in her protection of their children, and felt something shift inside his chest. This was what he'd been afraid of 2 years ago, the intensity of caring this much, of having something to lose that mattered more than his own life. But watching Elena fight for their family, he realized that fear was just another form of cowardice. I should have stayed, he said quietly. 2 years ago, I should have stayed and fought for us instead of running away. Elena was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on Lily's sleeping face. Why didn't you? She asked finally. And don't give me some noble speech about protecting me. Tell me the real reason. Adrian leaned back in his chair, forcing himself to confront the truth he'd been avoiding for 2 years. My father, he said simply. My mother died giving birth to me, and my father never let me forget that I killed her. He used to tell me that everything I touched turned to poison, that I destroyed anything good that came into my life. Elena turned to look at him, her expression softening slightly. When I met you, Adrian continued, when I fell in love with you, I was terrified that he was right. That I'd somehow destroy you too. So I left before I could prove him right. And instead, you proved him right anyway, Elena said, but her voice was gentle rather than accusatory. You left, and you destroyed us both. Adrian nodded, the truth of her words hitting him like a physical blow. I know. I was so afraid of becoming my father that I became exactly what he said I was, someone who ruins everything he touches. Elena was quiet for a moment, then reached out and placed her hand over his. The touch was brief, but it sent warmth shooting through Adrian's entire body. Your father was wrong, she said simply. You're not poison, Adrian. You're just scared. But our children don't have time for you to work through your fears. They need you to be brave. Adrian looked down at their joined hands, then at his children fighting for every breath in their hospital beds. Elena was right. Fear was a luxury he couldn't afford anymore. I'll fight the board tomorrow, he said. Whatever it takes. We'll fight them, Elena corrected. Together. The word hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than either of them was ready to acknowledge. They weren't back together, Elena had made that clear. But they were no longer alone in this battle. Adrian squeezed Elena's hand gently before releasing it. I should check their latest blood work, make sure they're stable for tomorrow. As he stood to review the monitors, Elena's voice stopped him. Adrian? Don't make me regret trusting you. He turned to meet her gaze, seeing both hope and fear warring in her dark eyes. I won't, he promised. Not this time. But as Adrian looked at the complex medical readouts, at his children's fragile bodies sustained by machines, he felt the weight of that promise settle on his shoulders like lead. Tomorrow, he would have to convince a room full of administrators to let him cut open his own children's chests and rebuild their hearts with his bare hands. And if he failed, if the board said no, if the surgery went wrong, if he proved his father right after all, he would lose everything that had ever mattered to him. The machines beeped steadily in the quiet room, counting down the hours until he would discover whether love was enough to overcome a lifetime of fear. The pediatric cardiac unit never truly slept. Even at 2:47 a.m., nurses moved through the halls with quiet efficiency, monitors beeped their steady rhythms, and worried parents kept vigil beside beds that held their entire worlds. Elena had been awake for 36 hours straight, but sleep felt impossible when every fluctuation in Lily's oxygen saturation sent her heart racing. She positioned her chair precisely between the twins' beds so she could touch both of them at once. Lucas's foot, Lily's tiny hand, anchoring herself to their presence like a lifeline. Adrian emerged from the small family conference room down the hall, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the same clothes he'd had on when Elena first walked into his office 12 hours ago. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his tie long since discarded, and there were dark circles under his green eyes that spoke of the same sleepless anxiety that gripped Elena. Cafeteria coffee, he said softly, offering her one of the cups. It's terrible, but it's hot. Elena accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic like it could anchor her to something solid. Thank you. Adrian settled into the chair across from her, close enough that they could speak in whispers without disturbing the babies. The proximity felt strange after 2 years of absence, familiar and foreign at the same time, like trying to remember the steps to a dance they'd once known by heart. Any word from the ethics board? Elena asked, though she knew he would have told her immediately if there had been news. Dr. Wong said she'd call by 6 a.m. with their decision. Adrian glanced at his watch. 3 hours. Elena nodded and took a sip of the coffee, which was indeed terrible. What happens if they say no? They won't. The conviction in Adrian's voice surprised them both. I spoke with every board member individually after you fell asleep. Reminded them of my surgical record, the complexity of the case, the time constraints we're facing. And I told them that if they tried to remove me from this case, I'd resign my position and take the twins to Johns Hopkins tonight. Adrian's jaw tightened. Amazing how quickly their concerns about emotional objectivity disappeared when faced with losing their department's biggest revenue generator. Elena studied his profile in the dim light from the monitors. This was a side of Adrian she remembered but hadn't seen in their final weeks together, the fierce determination that had made him the youngest department head in the hospital's history, the willingness to fight for what mattered. She'd forgotten how formidable he could be when he set his mind to something. You'd really resign? She asked quietly. For them. Adrian looked at Lucas and Lily, both sleeping peacefully despite the tubes and wires surrounding them. In a heartbeat. The simple honesty in his voice made Elena's chest tighten. This was the man she'd fallen in love with, not the polished, distant stranger who'd walked out of her apartment, but the passionate surgeon who would move mountains for his patients. For their children. I've been thinking, Elena said after a moment, about that night. When you left. Adrian's hands stilled around his coffee cup. Elena. You said I didn't understand what you were, what you came from. Elena kept her voice steady, though the memories still had the power to cut deep. Maybe I didn't. But you never gave me the chance to try. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on Lily's face. When he spoke, his voice was rough with old pain. My father used to lock me in the basement when he'd been drinking. Said I reminded him too much of what he'd lost, that my face was like having her ghost in the house. Elena felt her heart clench, but she didn't speak, sensing that Adrian needed to get this out. He'd leave me down there for hours sometimes, in the dark, telling me through the door how I'd killed the only good thing in his life. Adrian's hands trembled slightly as he set down his coffee. When I met you, when I started falling for you, all I could think about was how I'd eventually destroy that too. How I'd hurt you the way I'd apparently hurt everyone else just by existing. So you hurt me first, Elena said softly, understanding beginning to dawn. You thought if you made it cruel enough, quick enough, it would hurt less than watching yourself destroy us slowly. Something like that. Adrian finally looked at her, and Elena could see the scared boy he'd once been hiding behind the successful surgeon's facade. I was 28 years old and still letting a bitter old man's poison run my life. Elena reached across the space between their chairs and touched his hand, just briefly, but enough to offer comfort. Your father was wrong, Adrian. About all of it. Was he? Adrian gestured to the hospital room around them. Look where we are, Elena. Look what my choices cost our children. Your choices didn't give them heart defects, Elena said firmly. That's genetics, not karma. And your choices now, fighting for the right to save them being here, those matter more than what happened 2 years ago. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their children sleep. The monitors provided a steady soundtrack, heartbeats that were too fast, oxygen levels that fluctuated, but proof that Lily and Lucas were still fighting. Tell me about them, Adrian said eventually. What they were like as babies, their first words, all the things I missed. Elena felt her throat tighten, but there was something healing about sharing these memories with the only other person who would treasure them the way she did. Lucas said Mama first, at 11 months. But his second word was book. He was obsessed with this little board book about trucks. She smiled at the memory. Lily was quieter, more observant. She didn't talk until 13 months, but when she did, she said more pleas clear as day. Adrian laughed softly. Full sentences from the start. She gets that from you, you never did anything halfway. They both love music, Elena continued. There's this lullaby my grandmother used to sing to me, Dormit mi niño, and it's the only thing that calms them down when they're really upset. They'll stop crying the moment I start humming it. Sing it, Adrian said quietly. Elena looked at him in surprise. What? Sing it for them. For me. I want to hear what soothes our children. Elena felt her cheeks warm, suddenly self-conscious. She'd sung to the twins countless times, but always alone, always in the privacy of their small apartment. Sharing this felt intimate in a way that scared her. But Lily chose that moment to stir restlessly, her small face scrunching with discomfort, and Elena's maternal instincts overrode her hesitation. She began to hum softly, then let the familiar Spanish words fill the quiet room. Dormit mi niño, dormit mi amor, dormit pedazo de mi corazón. Adrian watched, transfixed, as both twins visibly relaxed at the sound of their mother's voice. Lucas's breathing deepened, and Lily's restless movements stilled. But more than that, Adrian felt something tight in his chest begin to unwind as Elena's voice washed over him. Gentle, loving, everything he dreamed of during the long empty nights of the past 2 years. Sleep, my child, sleep, my love, sleep, peace of my heart, Elena translated softly when the song ended. My grandmother said it would keep the bad dreams away. It's beautiful, Adrian said, his voice rough with emotion. They're beautiful. You're all beautiful. Elena felt tears prick her eyes at the raw honesty in his voice. Adrian. I know, he said quickly. I know this doesn't fix anything between us. But Elena, watching you with them, seeing what an incredible mother you are, I need you to know that walking away from you was the biggest mistake of my life." Before Elena could respond, Lily's monitors began to alarm. Both parents were on their feet instantly, Elena reaching for her daughter while Adrian checked the readouts with practiced eyes. "Her oxygen saturation is dropping," Adrian said, his voice shifting into professional mode. "She's going into heart failure." Elena felt panic claw at her throat as she watched Lily's lips turn blue, her tiny chest working harder and harder to draw breath. "Do something." Adrian was already moving, adjusting Lily's oxygen flow and pressing the call button for the nurses. "We need to intubate her now. Her heart can't wait until tomorrow." "What do you think will happen if Lily's condition deteriorates further? Should they move up the surgery, or can Adrian stabilize her until morning? Share your predictions below." The next few minutes were a blur of medical personnel flooding the room, machines being wheeled in, and Elena being gently but firmly moved aside as the team worked to stabilize her daughter. She stood pressed against the wall, watching strangers' hands on Lily's tiny body, feeling utterly helpless. Adrian's voice cut through the chaos, calm and authoritative as he directed the team. "Get me a 3.0 endotracheal tube and increase her dopamine drip. I want chest x-rays and another echo stat." Elena watched him work. This was Adrian in his element, the brilliant surgeon who'd saved hundreds of children's lives. His hands were steady, his voice never wavered, and gradually Lily's color began to improve as the breathing tube took over the work her failing heart couldn't handle. "She's stable," Adrian announced after what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. "But we can't wait until tomorrow. She needs surgery now." Elena felt her knees go weak with relief and terror. Now? In the middle of the night. "Her heart is failing faster than we anticipated. If we wait until morning, we might lose her." Adrian looked at Elena with gentle honesty. "I need to call in my team now." Elena nodded, knowing she had no choice. "Do it." As Adrian stepped out to make the necessary calls, Elena sank back into her chair and took Lily's intubated hand in hers. The breathing tube made her daughter look even more fragile, but her color was better, and the monitors showed her heart finding a steadier rhythm. "It's okay, baby girl," Elena whispered. "Daddy's going to fix your heart, and then you and Lucas are going to grow up strong and healthy and never have to worry about this again." Adrian returned a few minutes later. "My team will be here in 30 minutes. We'll do Lily's surgery first, then Lucas tomorrow as planned." "Are you ready?" Elena asked, searching his face for any sign of doubt. Adrian looked at his daughter, then at Elena, and she saw something in his green eyes that hadn't been there 2 years ago, not just love, but the courage to fight for it. "I've been ready my whole life for this," he said simply. "I just didn't know it until now." Elena reached out and took his hand, squeezing it tightly. "Save her, Adrian. Save our little girl." "I will," he promised, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Elena truly believed him. As the pre-surgical team began preparing Lily for transport to the operating room, Elena felt something shift between her and Adrian. They were no longer just two people thrown together by crisis. They were parents, united in their love for their children and their determination to fight for their family's future. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The surgical waiting room at 3:17 a.m. was a purgatory of fluorescent lights and uncomfortable chairs, where time moved like molasses and every passing minute felt like an eternity. Elena sat rigidly upright, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white, staring at the digital clock on the wall as if she could will the numbers to move faster. Lily had been in surgery for 2 hours and 14 minutes. Adrian had estimated the procedure would take between 4 and 6 hours, depending on the complexity of the reconstruction needed. Elena tried not to think about what complications might mean, tried not to imagine her daughter's tiny heart in Adrian's hands, tried not to remember every medical drama she'd ever seen where the surgeon emerged with devastating news. Lucas was back in the PICU, sedated and stable for now, but Elena's mind kept cycling between her children, one fighting for her life on an operating table, one waiting for his turn under the knife tomorrow. the weight of it all pressed down on her chest until she could barely breathe. Elena. She looked up to find Dr. Sarah Chun approaching with 2 cups of coffee and a gentle smile. Elena had called her earlier to explain the emergency surgery, and Sarah had driven to the hospital despite the late hour. Any updates? Sarah asked, settling into the chair beside Elena. Nothing yet. Elena accepted the coffee gratefully. Adrian said he'd send word every hour, but... She trailed off, staring at the doors that led to the surgical suites. He's the best, Elena. If anyone can save her, it's him. Elena nodded, knowing Sarah was right but unable to shake the terror that had taken up permanent residence in her chest. I keep thinking about all the things I should have said to her, you know? What if she doesn't remember that I love her? What if something goes wrong and I never get to tell her again? She knows, Sarah said firmly. Children always know when they're loved. It's written in every touch, every song, every sleepless night you've spent watching over them. Elena felt tears threaten and blinked them back. She'd cried enough over the past 24 hours to fill an ocean. I just feel so helpless. For 18 months, I've been her protector, her advocate, the one person who could always make her feel better. And now... Now you've done the most important thing a mother can do, Sarah interrupted gently. You've put her in the hands of someone who can save her. Elena was quiet for a moment, thinking about Adrian in the operating room, fighting to rebuild their daughter's heart. Despite everything that had happened between them, despite the pain and abandonment, she trusted him completely with Lily's life. That trust felt like both a gift and a burden. Can I ask you something? Elena said finally. About Adrian. About who he was before. Sarah nodded, settling back in her chair. What do you want to know? He told me about his father tonight. About his childhood. Elena wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup. But I keep wondering, how did someone who went through that become one of the most respected surgeons in the country? How did he survive it? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing how much to share. Adrian doesn't talk about his past much, but I've known him for 8 years. I can tell you that he almost didn't survive it. Elena felt her stomach tighten. What do you mean? He was 17 when he tried to take his own life. Sarah's voice was gentle but matter-of-fact. His father had been particularly brutal that week. Adrian had been accepted to Stanford with a full scholarship, and instead of being proud, his father accused him of thinking he was better than his family. Elena felt sick. The thought of Adrian as a teenager, alone and hopeless enough to want to end his life, made her heart break for the boy he'd been. What stopped him? She asked quietly. A teacher. Mrs. Patterson, his AP biology instructor. She found him in the school lab after hours, pills in his hand, ready to give up. Sarah smiled slightly. She didn't try to talk him out of it with platitudes or false comfort. She just asked him one question: what would you do if you had a chance to save lives instead of take one? Elena felt tears slip down her cheeks. He became a doctor. He became a surgeon. The best pediatric cardiac surgeon I've ever seen. Sarah looked toward the surgical doors. Mrs. Patterson saved his life by showing him he could save others. Every child he operates on is proof that his father was wrong about him. Elena thought about the man she'd fallen in love with, brilliant, passionate, but always carrying shadows she'd never fully understood. Is that why he left me? Because he was still that scared 17-year-old inside. I think, Sarah said carefully, that Adrian spent so many years being told he was poisoned that he couldn't believe someone like you could love him and survive it. When things got serious between you two, when he started imagining a future, he panicked. Elena finished the thought, understanding flooding through her. He thought he'd destroy me the way his father destroyed his mother. His mother didn't die because of him, Elena. She had an undiagnosed heart condition, ironically similar to what Lily and Lucas have. But Adrian's father needed someone to blame for his grief, and a newborn baby was an easy target. Elena felt a surge of fury toward a man she'd never met. How could someone blame a child for something so completely beyond their control? How could a father spend 18 years convincing his son that his very existence was destructive? When Adrian met you, Sarah continued, when he fell in love with you, it was probably the first time in his life he'd been truly happy. And that terrified him. Because happy was dangerous, Elena murmured, pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. Because in his experience, anything good got destroyed. Better to destroy it himself than wait for it to be taken away. They sat in silence for a while, Elena processing this new understanding of the man she'd loved and lost. It didn't excuse what Adrian had done, the pain he'd caused, the months she'd struggled alone, but it helped her understand why. He hadn't left because he didn't love her. He'd left because he loved her too much to trust that he deserved her. Elena. A nurse appeared in the doorway, and Elena's heart leaped into her throat. Dr. Cross asked me to update you. The surgery is progressing well. He's completed the first stage of the reconstruction and is moving on to the second phase. Everything looks good so far. Elena felt her knees go weak with relief. How much longer? Probably another 2 to 3 hours. He said to tell you that Lily is fighting like a champion. After the nurse left, Elena sank back into her chair and closed her eyes. Lily was fighting. Adrian was succeeding. Maybe, just maybe, they were going to get through this. Elena, Sarah said gently, can I ask you something now? Elena opened her eyes and nodded. What happens after? If the surgery goes well, if both twins recover, what happens between you and Adrian? It was the question Elena had been avoiding thinking about, the one that terrified her almost as much as the surgery itself. I don't know, she admitted. 24 hours ago, I hated him. Now I see who he really is. Who he was when I fell in love with him. Elena sighed. But Sarah, I can't go through losing him again. I barely survived it the first time, and now there are the twins to consider. If he walks away again. What if he doesn't? Sarah asked quietly. What if this crisis, as terrible as it is, gives you both a chance to start over? To build something real this time, based on truth instead of fear? Elena thought about the past 24 hours, Adrian's shock when he met his children, his fierce determination to save them, the way he'd fought the hospital board and risked his career. This wasn't the man who'd walked away from her 2 years ago. This was the man she'd glimpsed beneath his walls, the one she'd always believed existed. I want to believe that, Elena said finally. But trust isn't something you can just decide to have. It has to be earned. Then give him the chance to earn it. Before Elena could respond, the waiting room doors opened and Adrian appeared, still in surgical scrubs but with his mask pulled down. Elena's heart stopped until she saw his expression, exhausted but triumphant, relief and joy written across his features. She's okay, he said, his voice rough with emotion. The surgery went perfectly. Lily's heart is working exactly the way it should. Elena felt her legs give out, and Sarah caught her as sobs of relief racked her body. She's really okay. She's really okay. Adrian crossed the room and knelt in front of Elena's chair, taking her hands in his. She'll need time to recover, probably a few more surgeries as she grows, but Elena, she's going to live. She's going to have a normal, healthy life. Elena looked into Adrian's green eyes and saw the miracle he'd just performed reflected there. He'd saved their daughter. He'd kept his promise. Thank you, she whispered, squeezing his hands. Thank you for saving her. Thank you for trusting me to do it. Adrian's voice was thick with emotion. Elena, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said 2 years ago. Elena felt her heart begin to race, but not with medical anxiety this time. What? Adrian took a deep breath, as if steeling himself for the most important words he'd ever spoken. "I love you. I never stopped loving you. I was just too scared and stupid to fight for what we had. But I'm not scared anymore, Elena. Not of this, not of us, not of the future we could build together." What do you think Elena should say to Adrian's declaration? Is it too soon, or exactly what she needed to hear? Share your thoughts below. Elena stared at him, her heart thundering in her chest. 24 hours ago, these would have been the words she'd dreamed of hearing. Now, with their daughter recovering from heart surgery and their son facing the same procedure tomorrow, they felt both perfectly timed and impossibly complicated. "Adrian," she began, then stopped, overwhelmed by the magnitude of everything that had happened. "I know it's complicated," Adrian said quickly. "I know I have to prove that I'm not going anywhere this time. But Elena, these past 24 hours, seeing you with our children, remembering who we were together, I don't want to waste any more time being afraid of happiness." Elena looked at this man who'd just spent 6 hours rebuilding their daughter's heart, who'd risked everything to save their children, who'd finally found the courage to fight for their family. The scared boy Sarah had described was still there, but he was overshadowed now by the man Adrian had become, strong enough to face his demons, brave enough to choose love over fear. "I love you too," Elena whispered, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I tried so hard to stop, but I never could. Even when I hated you, I loved you." Adrian's face broke into the first genuine smile Elena had seen from him in 2 years. "Does that mean, can we try again? All of us, as a family?" Elena thought about Lucas waiting for his surgery, about Lily recovering in post-op, about the long road of healing ahead for all of them. It wouldn't be easy. There was still so much to work through, so much trust to rebuild. But looking at Adrian, she could see the future Mrs. Patterson had helped him envision all those years ago, a life spent saving others instead of destroying himself. "Yes," she said simply. "But Adrian, this isn't just about us anymore. Those children in there, they have to come first. Always." "Always," Adrian agreed, lifting her hands to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "They're the best parts of both of us, Elena. They're everything I want to protect and fight for." As if summoned by their words, the recovery room nurse appeared. "Dr. Cross, Lily is asking for her mommy." Elena felt her heart soar. Lily was awake, asking for her. Their daughter was going to be okay. "Ready to see our girl?" Adrian asked, standing and offering Elena his hand. Elena took it without hesitation, feeling the rightness of their joined hands, the promise of the future they were choosing together. "Ready." As they walked toward the recovery room together, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in 2 years, hope. Not just for Lily's recovery, or for Lucas's upcoming surgery, but for all of them. For the family they'd almost lost and were now brave enough to build. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was waiting for them to write it together. The pediatric cardiac recovery unit was a different world from the PICU, quieter, more hopeful, filled with the soft sounds of children healing rather than fighting for their lives. Elena sat beside Lily's bed at 6:43 a.m., watching her daughter sleep peacefully for the first time in months without the aid of oxygen support or breathing assistance. Lily's tiny chest rose and fell with the steady, strong rhythm of a properly functioning heart. The surgical incision was covered with a small bandage decorated with cartoon butterflies, and while she still had monitoring wires and N4, the desperate urgency that had surrounded her for 18 months was finally gone. "Look at her color," Adrian said softly, settling into the chair beside Elena with 2 cups of coffee and a brown paper bag that smelled like heaven. "Have you ever seen her lips that pink?" Elena smiled, unable to take her eyes off their daughter. "Never. Even as a newborn, she always had that blue tinge around her mouth. I used to think it was normal until the pediatrician explained what it meant." Adrian unpacked the bag, revealing fresh bagels, fruit, and what looked like real food instead of vending machine substitutes. "When's the last time you ate an actual meal?" "I don't remember," Elena admitted, suddenly realizing she was starving. Yesterday morning? Maybe the day before. Elena. Adrian's voice carried gentle reproach. You can't take care of them if you don't take care of yourself. I know, I just... Elena accepted the bagel he offered. When they were sick, eating felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. Like if I wasn't completely focused on them every second, something terrible would happen. Adrian was quiet for a moment, studying her profile as she watched Lily sleep. Is that how it's been? This whole time? You carrying everything alone? Elena took a bite of the bagel, plain with cream cheese, exactly how she liked it, and she felt a flutter of surprise that he'd remembered after all this time. It wasn't so bad at first. When they were newborns, they seemed healthy. It was only when they started missing milestones, when other mothers at the park would ask why my babies were so small, so tired. That must have been terrifying. It was lonely, Elena said simply. Being the only one who noticed, the only one who worried, the only one awake at 3 a.m. listening to them breathe and wondering if each breath might be their last. Adrian felt guilt hit him like a physical blow. While Elena had been keeping solitary vigil over their children, he'd been sleeping peacefully in his penthouse apartment, completely unaware that his family existed. I should have been there, he said quietly. Yes, you should have. Elena's voice held no malice, just simple truth. But you weren't. And I survived it. We all survived it. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sharing the simple meal and watching their daughter's peaceful sleep. For the first time in months, Elena felt her shoulders relax slightly, the constant tension of hypervigilance easing just enough to let her breathe fully. Elena. Lily's voice was small and hoarse from the breathing tube, but it was the most beautiful sound Elena had ever heard. I'm here, baby girl. Elena leaned forward, smoothing Lily's dark hair back from her forehead. Mama's right here. Lily's green eyes, so much like Adrian's, opened slowly, unfocused at first but gradually finding Elena's face. Mama hurt. No, sweetheart. Mama's not hurt. Elena felt tears threaten at the question. Even waking up from major surgery, Lily's first concern was for someone else. How do you feel? Sleepy. Lily's gaze drifted to Adrian, and Elena watched her daughter's expression shift to curiosity rather than fear. Man. Elena glanced at Adrian, seeing the emotion play across his features as he looked at his daughter, really looked at her, for the first time when she was awake and aware. This is Adrian, Elena said carefully. He's the doctor who fixed your heart. Lily studied Adrian with a serious intensity she'd inherited from both parents. Fixed. That's right, Adrian said, his voice gentle. Your heart is all better now. It's strong and healthy, just like it should be. To Elena's surprise, Lily smiled, a real genuine smile that lit up her whole face. Thank you. Adrian's composure finally cracked, and Elena saw tears slip down his cheeks. You're very welcome, sweetheart. Are you staying? Lily asked, the question so innocent and yet so loaded with meaning that both adults felt their breath catch. Adrian looked at Elena, seeking permission, guidance, some sign of what she wanted him to say. Elena felt her heart squeeze at the hope in his expression. Yes, Elena said finally, making the decision for all of them. Adrian is staying. Lily nodded as if this made perfect sense, then yawned hugely. Lucas. Lucas is sleeping, Elena assured her. He's going to get his heart fixed too, very soon. Good. Lily's eyes were already drifting closed again. Love Lucas. We all love Lucas, Elena whispered, kissing her daughter's forehead. Sleep now, baby girl. When you wake up, you're going to feel so much better. As Lily settled back into peaceful sleep, Elena became aware that Adrian was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. What? She asked softly. You, Adrian said simply. The way you are with them. Elena, you're incredible. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. I'm just their mother. No, you're not just anything. Adrian leaned forward in his chair. You've kept them alive, Elena. For 18 months, you've been their advocate, their protector, their everything. You've given them love and stability and strength even when you were running on empty yourself. I did what any mother would do. Not any mother could have done what you did. Adrian's voice was firm with conviction. I've seen a lot of families in crisis situations, Elena. I've seen parents crumble under pressure, marriages fall apart, families destroyed by medical trauma. What you did, raising them alone, fighting for their care, never giving up, that takes a special kind of strength. Elena felt tears threaten again, but this time they were different. Not tears of fear or exhaustion, but something warmer. When was the last time someone had recognized what the past 18 months had cost her? When had anyone acknowledged that she'd done more than just survive? I wasn't always strong, she admitted. There were nights when I locked myself in the bathroom and sobbed because I didn't know how I was going to pay for their medications. Days when I was so tired I could barely function but had to keep going because they needed me. That's exactly what makes you strong, Adrian said. Strength isn't not being afraid, Elena. It's being terrified and doing what needs to be done anyway. Before Elena could respond, Dr. Wong appeared in the doorway with a small entourage of medical staff. Elena tensed instinctively, but the chief of staff was smiling. Dr. Cross, Ms. Martinez, Dr. Wong said formally. I wanted to personally congratulate you on the success of Lily's surgery. The reconstruction is flawless, truly exceptional work. Thank you, Adrian replied, but his attention remained focused on Elena and Lily. The ethics board has also reached a decision regarding Lucas's surgery. Dr. Wong's smile widened slightly. Given the success of this procedure and Ms. Martinez's expressed confidence in Dr. Cross, we're approving him to perform Lucas's operation this afternoon. Elena felt relief flood through her. This afternoon? Lucas's numbers have been stable all night, Adrian explained. There's no reason to wait. The sooner we repair his heart, the sooner he can start the healing process. Do you think Lucas's surgery will go as smoothly as Lily's? Or will there be complications that test Adrian and Elena's newly rebuilt connection? Share your predictions below. As the medical team left them alone again, Elena found herself studying Adrian's profile as he gazed at their sleeping daughter. There was something different about him now, a softness around his eyes, a gentleness in his expression that she'd only seen glimpses of before. Adrian, she said quietly, can I ask you something? Anything. When you're operating, when you're holding a child's heart in your hands, what do you think about? Adrian considered the question for a moment. I think about giving them a future. About the first steps they'll take, the words they'll speak, the lives they'll live because their hearts are strong enough to carry them through everything. He paused. With Lily, with Lucas, I think about watching them grow up. Teaching them to ride bikes, helping with homework, walking them down the aisle someday. Elena felt something warm unfurl in her chest. You think about being their father. I think about being the father they deserve. The one I never had. Adrian met her gaze directly. Elena, I know I have no right to ask this, but could you teach me? How to be what they need. The vulnerability in his voice, the honesty of the request, made Elena's heart ache with something she hadn't felt in 2 years. Not just love, but hope for the kind of partnership she'd always dreamed of. We'll figure it out together, she said softly. All of it. How to be parents, how to be a family, how to trust each other again. Adrian reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand, and this time Elena didn't pull away. His fingers were warm, steady, and she could feel the slight tremor that spoke of exhaustion and adrenaline and the overwhelming relief of having their daughter safe. I missed this, he said quietly. Not just the big things, but this. Sitting with you, talking about things that matter. I forgot how easy it was to be myself around you. You never had to be anyone else with me, Adrian. That was never what I wanted from you. I know that now. Adrian lifted their joined hands and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. I was so afraid of not being enough that I became less than I could have been. Elena squeezed his hand. You saved our daughter's life last night. You fought an entire hospital board for the right to operate. You're exactly enough, Adrian. You always were. They were interrupted by a soft knock on the doorframe. A nurse stood there with a wheelchair and a gentle smile. Ms. Martinez? Lucas is asking for you. He's been awake for about 20 minutes and getting increasingly agitated. Elena felt her heart jump. Is he okay? Is something wrong? He's fine, the nurse assured her. His vitals are all stable. He just wants his mama. Elena looked at Lily, sleeping peacefully, then at Adrian. Stay with her. Of course. Adrian stood and helped Elena into the wheelchair, hospital policy for parents who'd been awake for 40 hours straight. I'll be right here when you get back. As the nurse wheeled Elena toward the PICU, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 2 years, the luxury of sharing the burden. Adrian was with Lily. She could go to Lucas without worrying about leaving their daughter alone. For the first time since the twins were born, she wasn't the only one keeping watch. The feeling was both foreign and wonderful, like remembering how to breathe after holding her breath for 20 months. When she reached Lucas's bed, her son's face lit up with a smile that made her heart soar. Mama. Hi, baby boy. Elena took his small hand in hers. I missed you too. Lily okay? Lucas asked, his vocabulary still limited but his concern clear. Lily is perfect. Her heart is all fixed, and she's sleeping peacefully. Lucas nodded seriously, then looked around the room. Man here. Elena felt her breath catch. What man, sweetheart? Nice man. Talks soft. Has my eyes. Elena stared at her son in amazement. Lucas had met Adrian for all of 5 minutes the day before, but somehow he'd recognized a connection, seen something familiar in Adrian's face. The nice man is here, Elena said carefully. He's staying with Lily while I visit you. Good. Lucas's simple acceptance warmed Elena's heart. He fixed my heart too. Yes, baby. He's going to fix your heart this afternoon, just like he fixed Lily's. Lucas smiled and squeezed Elena's hand with surprising strength. Then we all be okay. As Elena sat with her son, marveling at his resilience and acceptance, she realized that Lucas had just articulated what she'd been afraid to hope, that they were all going to be okay. Not just medically, but as a family. For the first time in 2 years, the future looked bright with possibility instead of dark with fear. The second surgery should have been routine. That's what Adrian had told Elena at 2 p.m. when Lucas was wheeled into the operating room with a brave smile and a whispered, "See you soon, Mama." Lily's procedure had gone perfectly, the techniques were proven, and Lucas's anatomy, while complex, followed the same patterns they'd successfully navigated 18 hours earlier. But at 7:23 p.m., after 5 hours and 23 minutes of surgery, nothing was going according to plan. Elena paced the surgical waiting room like a caged animal, her newfound peace shattered by the terrible arithmetic of time. Lily's surgery had taken 6 hours. Lucas had been under anesthesia for over 5, and still no word. Every minute that ticked by felt like a countdown to catastrophe. Elena, you need to sit down, Saracen said gently, but Elena couldn't stop moving. Standing still felt like surrender, like admitting that something might be going terribly wrong with her son. He said 4 to 6 hours, Elena said for the dozenth time. It's been 5.5. Why hasn't anyone come out? Why isn't there an update? Before Sarah could answer, the waiting room doors burst open and Adrian's surgical assistant, Dr. Michael Torres, appeared. His scrubs were blood-stained, his face grim, and Elena felt her world tilt on its axis. Elena, Dr. Torres said, his voice carefully controlled. "Dr. Cross needs to speak with you." "Is Lucas?" Elena couldn't finish the question, terror closing her throat. "He's alive," Dr. Torres said quickly. "But there are complications. Serious ones. Dr. Cross is asking for a few minutes to explain the situation." Elena felt her knees buckle, and Sarah caught her arm. "I want to see Adrian. Now. He can't leave the OR. But he can speak with you from the surgical suite via video link." Dr. Torres led Elena to a small conference room where a monitor showed Adrian in full surgical gear, his green eyes visible above his mask. Behind him, Elena could see the controlled chaos of an operating room in crisis. Multiple monitors, additional staff, and somewhere in that sterile environment, her son fighting for his life. "Elena," Adrian's voice came through the speakers, strained with exhaustion and something that sounded like barely controlled panic. "I need you to listen to me carefully. Tell me what's wrong." Elena gripped the edge of the table, steeling herself for whatever was coming. "Lucas's anatomy is more complex than we anticipated. When I opened his chest, I found additional defects we didn't see on the imaging. His pulmonary arteries are severely hypoplastic, and there's an unexpected ventricular septal defect that's complicating the reconstruction." Elena felt like she was drowning in medical terminology, but she forced herself to focus. "In English, Adrian. What does that mean?" Adrian's pause lasted forever. "It means the surgery is taking longer than expected. Much longer. And the reconstruction is more complex than anything I've ever attempted." "But you can fix it?" Elena heard the desperation in her own voice. "You can save him?" Another terrible pause. "I'm trying, Elena. We're all trying. But I have to be honest with you, this is beyond anything in the medical literature. I'm essentially inventing the procedure as I go." Elena felt the room spin around her. "How long?" "I don't know. Another 4 hours, maybe 6. And Elena." Adrian's voice cracked slightly. "There's something else. The longer he's under anesthesia, the higher the risk of complications. His kidneys are starting to show signs of stress, and his blood pressure is becoming difficult to maintain." "What are you saying?" Elena whispered, though she was afraid she already knew. "I'm saying that continuing the surgery carries significant risks. But stopping now, leaving his heart only partially repaired." Adrian's voice broke completely. "Elena, I don't know if he'll survive either choice." The words hit Elena like physical blows. After everything, after Lily's successful surgery, after their tentative reconciliation, after allowing herself to hope, they were back to this terrible place where her child's life hung in the balance and there were no good choices. "What do you need from me?" she asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "I need you to decide," Adrian said quietly. "As his mother, as the person who knows him best, do I continue the surgery and risk losing him on the table, or do I close him up and hope we can find another solution later?" Elena stared at the monitor, at Adrian's exhausted face, and felt the weight of an impossible decision settling on her shoulders. Continue and risk losing Lucas during surgery, or stop and watch him slowly die over the coming weeks as his partially repaired heart failed. "How much time do I have to decide?" "Minutes," Adrian said honestly. "His condition is deteriorating, Elena. I need an answer soon." Elena closed her eyes, thinking about her son's brave smile as he was wheeled into surgery, his sweet question about whether the nice man would fix his heart too. Lucas trusted her to make the right choice, trusted her to protect him the way she always had. But how could she choose between two potentially fatal options? "Elena," Adrian's voice was gentle through the speakers. "What does your heart tell you?" Elena opened her eyes and looked at Adrian, the man who'd saved their daughter, who'd risked everything to be here, who was now asking her to trust him with their son's life in the most impossible circumstances. "My heart tells me," she said slowly, "that Lucas is a fighter. That he's been fighting his whole life, even when I didn't know how sick he was. And fighters don't give up. Adrian nodded, understanding flooding his exhausted features. Continue the surgery. Continue the surgery, Elena confirmed. And Adrian? Don't you dare let him die in there. Don't you dare prove your father right about destroying everything you touch. What do you think will happen during the rest of Lucas's surgery? Can Adrian overcome the impossible odds, or will this crisis shatter the family that's just begun to heal? Share your thoughts below. Adrian's eyes closed briefly behind his surgical mask. I won't let him die, Elena. I promise you that. The connection ended, leaving Elena alone in the conference room with the weight of her decision and 6 more hours of waiting ahead of her. She thought about Lily, recovering peacefully upstairs, unaware that her twin brother was fighting for his life. She thought about Adrian, pushing the boundaries of medical science to save their son. And she thought about Lucas himself, 18 months old, brave and sweet and trusting, depending on all of them to bring him home. Elena returned to the waiting room and sank into a chair, feeling older than her 28 years. Sarah sat beside her, offering silent comfort, while the clock on the wall ticked away precious seconds. At 9:15 p.m., Dr. Torres appeared again, this time with an update that made Elena's blood run cold. Lucas went into cardiac arrest 20 minutes ago, he said without preamble. Dr. Cross was able to resuscitate him, but his heart stopped for almost 3 minutes. The lack of oxygen. He trailed off, unable to finish. Brain damage. Elena whispered. We won't know until he wakes up. If he wakes up. Elena felt something break inside her chest, not her heart, which was still beating, but something deeper. The hope she'd allowed herself to feel, the trust she'd placed in Adrian, the belief that their family could survive this nightmare intact. I want to see him, she said flatly. Elena, you can't go into the OR. I want to see my son. Elena's voice carried an authority that brooked no argument. Find a way. Dr. Torres looked at her for a moment, then nodded. There's an observation deck above the surgical suite. You could watch through the glass. Elena followed him through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, her mind numb with shock and terror. The observation deck was a small room with a large window overlooking the operating theater, used for medical students and visiting physicians to observe complex procedures. Below her, Elena could see Adrian hunched over Lucas's tiny form, his hands working with desperate precision inside her son's open chest. The monitors around the table showed numbers Elena had learned to read over the past months: heart rate, blood pressure, oxygen saturation, and all of them looked wrong. Lucas looked so small on the massive operating table, dwarfed by machines and surrounded by medical professionals fighting to save his life. Elena pressed her hand against the glass, wishing she could touch him, wishing she could take his place, wishing she had never agreed to this surgery that might cost her everything. For the next 2 hours, Elena watched Adrian work with a focus and determination that was almost superhuman. She saw him rebuild blood vessels smaller than pencil lead, reconstruct chambers that were barely the size of walnuts, create new pathways for blood flow that had never existed in her son's body. At 11:47 p.m., something changed. The monitors showed a steady rhythm, the frantic pace in the OR slowed, and Elena saw Adrian step back from the table with his hands raised in a gesture she recognized as triumph. Dr. Torres appeared beside her, grinning broadly. The repair is complete. Lucas's heart is beating on its own, and all his vital signs are stable. Dr. Cross did it, Elena. He actually did it. Elena felt her knees give out, relief hitting her like a tidal wave. Is he going to be okay? The cardiac arrest, the brain damage. We won't know about neurological function until he wakes up, but his reflexes during surgery were good. Dr. Cross is cautiously optimistic. Elena watched as Adrian closed Lucas's chest, his movements now calm and precise rather than desperate. When he finally looked up toward the observation window, Elena saw exhaustion and triumph warring in his green eyes. But she also saw something else, the look of a man who had pushed himself beyond all reasonable limits and wasn't sure he could do it again. As the surgical team began moving Lucas to recovery, Elena felt a complex mix of emotions washing over her. Relief that her son had survived. Gratitude for Adrian's skill and determination. But also a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that went beyond the physical. Lucas was alive, but the cardiac arrest had changed everything. Instead of the smooth recovery they'd hoped for, they now faced weeks of uncertainty, waiting to see if her son would wake up whole and healthy or forever changed by those 3 minutes without oxygen. Elena had trusted Adrian with her children's lives, and he had saved them both. But the cost, the hours of terror, the impossible decisions, the knowledge of how close they'd come to losing everything, had left scars that might never fully heal. As she made her way to the recovery unit to wait for Lucas to wake up, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that while they had won this battle, the war for their family's future was far from over. The pediatric intensive care unit at 3:42 a.m. was a cathedral of whispered prayers and held breath. Lucas had been out of surgery for 4 hours, his tiny body surrounded by machines that monitored every heartbeat, every breath, every sign that might indicate whether 3 minutes without oxygen had stolen pieces of the bright, curious boy Elena knew. Elena sat between her children's beds, Lily sleeping peacefully in recovery, Lucas unconscious and intubated in the PICU, feeling like she was living in 2 different realities. One where her daughter was healed and thriving, another where her son might never wake up the same. Adrian stood at the foot of Lucas's bed, still in scrubs he'd been wearing for 18 hours, studying the monitors with the obsessive focus of a man trying to will good news into existence. His hands shook slightly from exhaustion and caffeine, but his eyes never left the readouts that would tell them whether his surgical miracle had come at too high a price. "His intracranial pressure is stable," Adrian said quietly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them for the past hour. "That's good. It means there's no significant brain swelling." Elena nodded without looking at him. She'd been avoiding eye contact since Lucas came out of surgery, afraid that if she looked at Adrian directly, she'd either collapse into his arms or scream at him for putting their son through this ordeal. Both impulses felt equally strong and equally dangerous. "Elena," Adrian said gently, "you should try to get some sleep. I can watch him. I'm not leaving." Elena's voice was flat, emotionless. "I left him to go to Lily yesterday, and when I came back, he was asking for me. I won't do that again. You've been awake for over 40 hours. You're going to make yourself sick. Then I'll be sick." Elena finally looked at Adrian, and he was startled by the coldness in her dark eyes. "You don't get to tell me what's best for my children anymore. Not after this." The words hit Adrian like a slap. "Elena, what do you mean?" Elena stood up from her chair, her movements sharp with barely contained anger. "I mean that 6 hours ago, you asked me to choose between 2 ways my son might die. You put that decision on me, Adrian. You made me responsible for whatever happens to him." "Elena, that's not. Isn't it?" Elena's voice rose slightly, and a nurse glanced over with concern. Elena lowered her voice, but not the intensity. "You're the surgeon. You're the expert. But when things got complicated, when the risk was too high, suddenly it was my choice to make." Adrian felt something cold settle in his chest. "I was trying to respect your rights as his mother. The surgery was beyond anything in the literature." "You were covering yourself," Elena said with bitter clarity. "If Lucas dies, if he wakes up brain damaged, it won't be because the great Dr. Cross made the wrong call. It'll be because his mother insisted on continuing the surgery." The accusation was so unexpected, so completely at odds with Adrian's intentions, that for a moment he couldn't speak. When he found his voice, it was rough with hurt and exhaustion. "Is that really what you think? That I was trying to protect my reputation instead of our son?" "I think," Elena said carefully, "that when the pressure was at its highest, when the choice was hardest, you did exactly what you did 2 years ago. You walked away from the responsibility and left me to handle it alone." Adrian stared at her, seeing the woman he'd fallen in love with, but also seeing the damage his abandonment had caused. Elena had spent 20 months making every decision about their children alone, carrying every burden, facing every crisis without backup. Of course she would interpret his request for her input as another abandonment. Elena, that's not what happened. I asked for your decision because you're his mother, because it was easier than making the choice yourself. Elena's eyes blazed with 2 years of suppressed fury. Do you have any idea what it was like, standing in that room, choosing between 2 ways to lose my child? Do you understand what you asked of me? Adrian felt the weight of his mistakes settling on his shoulders like lead. He'd thought he was honoring Elena's role as Lucas's mother, but from her perspective, he'd abandoned her at the moment she needed him most. You're right, he said quietly. I should have made the call myself. I should have taken that burden instead of putting it on you. Yes, you should have. Elena's anger was giving way to something deeper, disappointment that cut Adrian to the bone. I trusted you, Adrian. For the first time in 2 years, I let myself trust you completely. And when it mattered most, you proved that nothing had really changed. Adrian wanted to argue, wanted to explain that his motivations had been pure, that he'd been trying to include her rather than exclude her. But looking at Elena's face, exhausted, hurt, betrayed, he realized that intent mattered less than impact. Whatever he'd meant to do, he'd caused her pain at the worst possible moment. Elena, I'm sorry. I was wrong to put that choice on you. Sorry doesn't fix this. Elena sank back into her chair, suddenly looking fragile rather than fierce. Sorry doesn't change the fact that for 3 minutes, our son's heart stopped beating because I told you to continue a surgery that might have killed him. Lucas's cardiac arrest wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? Elena's voice broke. If I'd chosen differently, if I'd told you to stop the surgery, he'd be awake right now. Maybe not completely healed, but awake and whole and himself. Adrian knelt beside Elena's chair, desperate to reach her through the wall of guilt and regret she'd built around herself. Elena, listen to me. Lucas needed that surgery. Without it, he would have died within weeks. The cardiac arrest was a risk with any option we chose. But I chose the option that caused it. Elena's tears finally came, silent streams down her cheeks. I chose to gamble with his life, and now. She gestured helplessly at Lucas's still form, and Adrian felt his heart break for all of them, for Elena carrying this impossible burden, for Lucas fighting to return to them, for the family they'd been trying to rebuild that seemed to be fracturing under the weight of trauma. What do you think Elena needs to hear right now? Should Adrian fight for their relationship, or give her space to process this trauma? Share your thoughts below. Before Adrian could respond, Lucas's monitors began to change. Heart rate increasing, brain activity showing new patterns, the subtle signs that a patient was beginning to wake up. Elena, Adrian said urgently. Look. Elena's head snapped up, and they both watched as Lucas's eyelids began to flutter. His small hand moved slightly, and then his eyes opened, unfocused at first, but gradually finding Elena's face. Mama. Lucas's voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from the breathing tube, but it was the most beautiful sound Elena had ever heard. I'm here, baby. Elena leaned forward, taking his hand in hers. Mama's right here. Lucas's eyes tracked to Adrian, and Elena held her breath, waiting to see if her son would recognize the man who'd saved his life. Nice man, Lucas whispered, and Adrian felt tears slip down his cheeks. Hi, Lucas, Adrian said softly. How do you feel? Lucas considered the question with the seriousness of a much older child. Heart feels good, he said finally. Strong. Elena laughed through her tears, relief flooding through her so powerfully she felt dizzy. Lucas was awake, he was talking, he was himself. The 3 minutes of cardiac arrest hadn't stolen her son from her. But as the immediate crisis passed, the larger issues remained. Elena looked at Adrian with emotions too complex to name, gratitude for saving Lucas, anger for the impossible choice, fear of trusting him again, love that refused to die despite everything. "We need to talk," she said quietly, her voice still strained from hours of tears and terror. Adrian nodded, understanding that their future hung in the balance just as surely as Lucas's life had hours earlier. "After he's stable. After we know he's really okay." Elena agreed with a nod, then turned her full attention back to Lucas, who was drowsily asking about Lily and whether she was still sleeping. Elena answered his questions with the patience of a mother who'd thought she might never hear his voice again, while Adrian watched from a distance that felt both respectful and infinitely lonely. Over the next several hours, as Lucas's condition continued to improve and the medical team confirmed that he'd suffered no apparent neurological damage, Elena found herself facing a choice that felt almost as impossible as the one Adrian had forced on her in the oar. She could forgive him, accept that his request for her input had been misguided but not malicious, understand that the trauma of the night had colored her perception of his actions. She could choose to rebuild their family, to trust that he'd learned from his mistakes, to believe that love was enough to overcome their complicated history. Or she could protect herself and her children from future heartbreak by keeping Adrian at a safe distance, grateful for his medical skills but unwilling to risk her heart or her children's stability on a man who might abandon them again when things got difficult. Elena looked at her children, Lily sleeping peacefully, Lucas weak but whole, and then at Adrian, who was reviewing Lucas's latest test results with the obsessive focus of a man trying to ensure nothing else went wrong. The choice was hers to make. And this time, she knew Adrian wouldn't try to make it for her. But that knowledge, which should have felt empowering, instead felt like another burden in a night that had already asked too much of her heart. 3 days later, Elena sat in the hospital's family garden watching Lily toddle unsteadily across the grass toward a butterfly that danced just out of reach. Her daughter's color was perfect, rosy cheeks, pink lips, the vibrant health that had been missing for 18 months. Lily's scar was hidden beneath a tiny t-shirt that read Heart Warrior, a gift from one of the nurses who'd fallen in love with both twins. Lucas was still in the PICU, recovering more slowly but steadily. The cardiac arrest had left him weaker than Lily, requiring a few extra days of monitoring, but every test showed a strong, healthy heart beating exactly as it should. He'd asked for his sister that morning, and Elena had finally convinced the doctors to let Lily visit for a few minutes. "She's beautiful," Adrian said quietly, settling onto the bench beside Elena. He'd been keeping his distance for the past 3 days, giving Elena space to process everything that had happened, but she'd finally asked him to meet her here. "They both are." Elena watched Lily give up on the butterfly and instead focus on picking dandelions with intense concentration. "The doctors say Lucas can probably go home in a few days." "That's wonderful news." Adrian's voice carried genuine joy mixed with something that sounded like longing. "Elena, I wanted to thank you for letting me see them these past few days, for including me in their care decisions. I know things between us are complicated," Elena finished when he trailed off. "That's one word for it." Elena was quiet for a moment, watching her daughter's simple joy in discovering flowers. "Adrian, I need to tell you something. About that night, about the choice you asked me to make." Adrian tensed beside her. "Elena, let me finish." Elena turned to face him directly. "I was angry at you for putting that decision on me. Furious, actually. It felt like abandonment all over again." "I understand why you felt that way," Adrian said carefully. "I should have. But I was wrong." Elena's words stopped Adrian mid-sentence. "I've had 3 days to think about it, to really examine what happened in that moment. And I realized something important." Adrian waited, hardly daring to breathe. "You didn't ask me to choose because you were trying to protect yourself or avoid responsibility," Elena continued. "You asked because you respect me as Lucas's mother. Because you believe I know our children better than anyone else, even you." Adrian felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen. "Elena, 2 years ago, you made decisions about our relationship without consulting me. You decided what was best for both of us and acted on it, even though it destroyed us." Elena's voice was steady, thoughtful. But in that operating room, when faced with the most important decision of our son's life, you didn't repeat that pattern. You included me. You trusted my judgment even when it was the harder choice for you to make. Adrian stared at her, understanding dawning. You're saying I did the right thing? I'm saying you did the hard thing. The brave thing. Elena smiled sadly. And I punished you for it because I was terrified and looking for someone to blame. Elena, you don't need to apologize. What I asked of you was impossible. What you asked of me was to be Lucas's mother in the truest sense. Elena reached out and took Adrian's hand. To advocate for him, to make the choice I believed was right, even when it was terrifying. And I did that, Adrian. I chose to fight for his life, and because of that choice, he's alive and healthy. Adrian felt tears slip down his cheeks. I was so afraid I'd lost you again. That my mistakes had cost us everything. Your mistake 2 years ago was leaving without giving me a voice. Your choice 3 nights ago was to give me the ultimate voice in our son's care. Elena squeezed his hand. Those aren't the same thing, Adrian. They're the opposite of each other. Before Adrian could respond, Lily came running over with a fistful of dandelions, her face bright with excitement. Mama. Flowers. Beautiful flowers, baby girl. Elena accepted the weeds like they were roses. Did you pick these for me? Lily nodded enthusiastically, then noticed Adrian and offered him a single dandelion with serious formality. For nice man. Adrian accepted the flower with reverence that made Elena's heart ache. Thank you, Lily. It's perfect. Lily beamed and climbed onto the bench between them, settling against Elena's side with the unconscious trust of a child who knew she was safe and loved. Elena looked at their small family picture, imperfect, complicated, but finally complete, and felt something settle in her chest that had been restless for 2 years. Adrian, she said quietly, I want to try again. All of us, together. Adrian's breath caught. Are you sure? After everything. Because of everything. Elena's voice was firm with conviction. We've been tested in every way possible. Medical crisis, impossible decisions, fear, exhaustion, trauma. And we survived it together. We saved our children together. What do you think their future will look like? Will they be able to build a stronger relationship from the lessons they've learned? Let me know your thoughts below. Adrian looked at Elena holding their daughter, both of them stronger for everything they'd endured, and felt the last of his father's poison finally leave his system. I love you, he said simply. Both of you. All of you. I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I'm not going anywhere. Then prove it, Elena said with a smile that carried both challenge and invitation. Not with grand gestures or promises, but with the small things. Midnight feedings and doctor's appointments and helping with homework and being present for all the ordinary moments that make a family. I can do that. Adrian's voice carried the weight of a vow. I want to do that. Lily looked up at both adults, seeming to sense the importance of the moment. We go see Lucas now? Yes, baby, Elena said, standing and lifting Lily into her arms. Let's go see your brother. As they walked back toward the hospital, Elena felt Adrian's hand slip into hers, tentative at first, then with growing confidence when she didn't pull away. It wasn't the desperate passion of their early relationship or the painful desperation of the past few days. It was something steadier, more mature, the connection of two people who'd chosen each other not just in love, but in crisis, fear, and the hard work of building something real. Elena, Adrian said as they reached the hospital entrance. There's something I want to ask you. Elena paused, studying his expression. What? Move in with me. You and the twins. Not because you need my help or my money, but because I want us to be a family. A real family, in the same house, sharing everything. Elena felt her heart race, but not with fear this time. Adrian, that's a big step. We should take things slowly. We've had 2 years of slowly, Adrian interrupted gently. 2 years of separation and pain and missed opportunities. I don't want to waste any more time, Elena. I want to wake up every morning knowing my children are safe and healthy. I want to help with their baths and read them bedtime stories and hold you when you have nightmares about almost losing them. Elena looked at this man who'd saved their children's lives, who'd fought an entire hospital board for the right to operate, who'd asked for her trust in the most impossible moment and then honored that trust with everything he had. Yes, she said simply. Yes. Yes, we'll move in with you. But Adrian, Elena's voice carried gentle warning. This isn't a fairy tale. We're going to have hard days. The twins will need follow-up surgeries as they grow. We'll disagree about parenting decisions. I'll probably have PTSD from this whole experience, and you'll probably struggle with letting people close after a lifetime of pushing them away. Adrian smiled, and Elena saw in his expression not the naive optimism of young love, but the mature determination of a man who'd finally learned that the best things in life were worth fighting for. Then we'll handle the hard days together, he said. All of them. As they entered the hospital elevator, Lily babbling happily about seeing her brother and Elena leaning into Adrian's solid warmth, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced since she was 19 years old and falling in love for the first time, the certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. 6 months later. Elena stood in the kitchen of Adrian's, their house, watching through the window as Adrian pushed Lily and Lucas on the swing set he'd installed in the backyard. Both children were laughing with the pure joy of toddlers whose hearts were strong enough to handle running and playing and living without limits. Lucas bore a matching scar to his sisters, but both marks had faded to thin silver lines that would always remind them how precious and fragile life could be. The twins were thriving, growing, talking more every day, and showing no signs that their difficult start in life had left any lasting effects. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Chun. 6-month follow-up echoes look perfect. Both hearts functioning beautifully. See you in a year unless there are concerns. Elena smiled, then walked outside to share the good news with Adrian. He caught her around the waist as she approached, spinning her in a circle that made the twins giggle and clap. Good news? He asked, having recognized her expression. The best. Clean bill of health for both of them. Adrian's smile was brilliant with relief and joy. Even 6 months later, even with everything going perfectly, he still worried. Elena had learned that was part of loving someone. The fear never completely went away, but it became manageable when shared. Daddy, push higher. Lily demanded, and Adrian returned to his swing-pushing duties with mock seriousness. Elena watched her family, because that's what they were now, officially and completely, and felt the deep contentment of a woman who'd fought for what mattered and won. It hadn't been easy. There had been difficult conversations about parenting styles, moments of doubt when old patterns tried to reassert themselves, nights when Elena woke in a panic thinking she heard one of the twins in distress. But they'd handled it all together. Adrian had kept his promise about being present for the small moments. He was the one who got up for middle-of-the-night fevers, who knew exactly how Lucas liked his sandwiches cut, who could calm Lily's tantrums with patience Elena sometimes envied. Mama. Lucas called from his swing. Watch me go high. I'm watching, baby boy. Elena called back, her heart full to overflowing. As the sun set over their backyard, painting everything in golden light, Elena thought about the scared, exhausted woman who'd walked into Adrian's office 6 months ago with 2 dying babies and a heart full of desperate hope. That woman could never have imagined this moment, her children healthy and happy, her family whole, her future bright with possibility. Sometimes the greatest miracles weren't the dramatic surgical saves or the moments of medical triumph. Sometimes they were simpler, the sound of children's laughter, the feeling of being truly known and loved, the quiet certainty that whatever challenges came next, they would face them together. Elena had finally learned to trust in forever. And forever, she realized as Adrian caught her eye and smiled with love that would last a lifetime, was exactly what they'd built. Thank you for watching until the very end. If you loved this story, there's a whole collection waiting for you. Just click the image on your screen to dive into the next video.